Happy Monday, folks. Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where every single Monday right here on the show I break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. So for the first time ever here on the show, I'm breaking down the Stone Cold podcast. I've watched every one in the past as they aired originally on the network, but I have yet to review any one of them in full. Like I've talked about, my brief thoughts on them on like Wrestle Rant Radio, and I'm sure there's clips of them here on the channel from years past. But I've never reviewed a full Austin podcast, play-by-play from the network at all on WWE Network and Chill in the past 8 or 9 months I've been doing the show. I knew a new Table for 3 episode aired last Monday on the network, and you're like, oh, maybe you should review that. And usually I do. I'll talk about it next week. I think it featured AJ Styles, Shawn Michaels, and Kevin Nash. So I'll talk about that probably next week. But I just watched this one episode of the Stone Cold podcast just recently, so I figured I'd talk about it. And that is the Dean Ambrose podcast. Yes, the polarizing, much talked about Dean Ambrose podcast from August 8th, 2016. At the time, he was the WWE champion. And just the brand split just happened, and he was the face of SmackDown, so... Anyway, the real reason why this podcast, and I think the last one that Stone Cold has done to date too, and it's not hard to see why, this was not a good one. This is definitely not among my favorites. I like Ambrose a lot. He did a great podcast a few years back before they fucking axed him and they blacklisted him with Colt Cabana on The Art of Wrestling. I think in early 2014, late 2013, something like that. And it was really, really good. This was not as good. I don't know if it was a clash of personalities or just Ambrose is an awkward person in general. Like, he doesn't do great interviews. And I've known that forever. I know he used to do podcasts or interview. Like, the pod, I can't say he hasn't done good podcasts. He did a couple good ones with Jericho. He did like a really awkward interview with like Sam Roberts a few years ago. He's like a very weird person to be around. Like, he's very chill. He's very laid back. But he says a lot. He doesn't like to share and about a lot of his upbringing and stuff like that. So it's hard to talk with him, it seems like. So overall, and then like Austin's like pushing him to get information out of him, but Ambrose doesn't really want to share. So it kind of creates a weird contrast of style. So that's why this was not the greatest podcast. Maybe a train wreck, so to speak, but maybe in the best way possible. Weird way to describe it, but anyway, so here are my thoughts, and I'll give a play-by-play as to what they talk about. They start off talking about music. Ambrose admits to liking old country music, and then he talks about his upbringing in Cincinnati. He mentioned that his mom had just quit her job at a factory after about 13 years at the time this was filmed in late 2016, because he felt like he got in a good enough place in WWE where he was making enough money to pay off her house and shit, where she didn't have to work at a job in a factory after 13 years. So that was pretty cool. He admits to having had a happy childhood, but he quit school. He said he was good in school growing up in like elementary school, but then again, who isn't? And he kind of liked school. But when he got to middle school and he singled out the moment where he had an independent thought, he said, he's like, why am I going to school? He didn't really feel that it was necessary. And he hated high school, so he just quit. He just stopped going to school. He couldn't name a certain moment where he just stopped or a certain, like, an epiphany that he had where he just didn't want to go to school anymore. He just never liked school, so he never went back. So I guess he said that's why he had a happy childhood. He might have been sarcastic. I don't know. Stone Cold grills him on that. But he had said he played football in school, and he kind of, quote-unquote, goes with the wind. I guess that's the perfect way to sum up Dean Ambrose in 4 words. Then they transition into wrestling. The stuff here that you came here for. He said he's been a wrestling fan as far back as he can remember, as I'm sure a lot of people can. I mean, some people say, "Oh, I watched Hulk Hogan that one time, and I became a fan from that point forward. I knew I wanted to do this." He never really said. He said he couldn't pinpoint a time where that had happened. He had just been a fan since as long as he could remember. He admits to having, this was fun, he admits to having shoplifted tapes from like Blockbuster Video, and he said it doesn't matter now to having done it just because Blockbuster Video is no longer around, which is true. Sad but true. He loved ECW, big fan of Terry Funk. He talks about paying his dues in the business at a camp where he used to take bumps for like 3 months straight, and once he perfected that, he would move on to the next thing, and then the next thing after that. There were several points where he admitted to wanting to have quit the business, just because it took its toll on him, and he just grew really frustrated, but he didn't have a plan B, but he just came back the next day, so that was all that he really had to do. He talked about having a great time in Puerto Rico when he first started out in the business, but WWE was always the goal. But he had this attitude where if he would do his own thing, okay, like he would watch Raw one week and say, I could do that. I'm sure everyone feels that way. But he said, I could do that. But he felt that he's going to do exactly what they're doing, but do it over here. And if I don't get interested, if I don't get, picked up by WWE, if I don't get seen by WWE, then it doesn't matter. Fuck them. I'll just, do my own thing over here. So I'm not going to try to get there, even though that's where I want to end up. I'm just going to keep on doing my thing. And if they notice me, they notice me. He talks about getting a call from someone named Ty Bailey, who apparently doesn't work there anymore. And he thought it was a rib. And Ty Bailey says, you got a job, blah, blah, blah. And I guess Joey Mercury got him the hookup. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll get you in contact with our secretary, Ambrose, apparently being a dick over the phone because he thought it was a rib. And then Joey Mercury follows up saying, hey, congratulations on the job. Ambrose is like, holy shit, that was real. And Austin's like, does anything get you excited? And he's like, yeah, no, I'm freaking out on the inside, blah, blah, blah. And he said he loved it down in FCW, very laid back. Praised Dusty Rhodes and liked the fact that he's like, wow, holy shit, I'm wrestling on a show that was written by Dusty Rhodes. That's pretty fucking big. That's a big deal. He talks about enjoying the programs he had with Seth Rollins, a 2-year rivalry they had down there even before they made it to the main roster as The Shield. And the feud he had with Regal, which I've seen a bit of. I know I've seen their match before from FCW, which was great shit, one of Regal's final feuds in wrestling before retiring in 2013. He talks about no script. They go on a long talk about promos. He said there was no scripted promos in FCW, and now it's very different in the main roster, which kind of goes without saying. He says it's tough for him to memorize promos, and it's not really fun anymore when he has to recite a bunch of lines, and he's not really, it's not really coming from the heart. But he did admit that he's at a point now where he can kind of say what he wants, or he can kind of use bullet points, and he can run it by Vince, and he can kind of say what he feels is right, what would make sense for his character, which makes sense considering he was the WWE champion at that time. I'm sure he can, having been in the business for having been with WWE on the main roster for 5 years at this point, maybe that can still be the case, despite no longer being, the guy on SmackDown, not just being another guy on Raw. Anyway, he talks about having had a chip on his shoulder in his Shield days, along with Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins, and that it was all organic. Everything came along naturally. They all had a pissed-off attitude and said, if the guys there on the main roster want to bury us or they want to do wrong by us, fuck them. We're going to do our thing. We're going to try to obtain as much success as possible. He did confirm that the Shield was intended to be goons for CM Punk, which was pretty well known. I think Rollins said it, Roman might have said it. I know Punk himself had said it on the Art of Wrestling podcast a few years earlier. But he had said he actually liked the breakup of the Shield. Now, I've heard conflicting opinions on this. I've heard from Batista, who said it was bullshit, who put over the Shield twice at Extreme Rules and Payback respectively, that there was much more mileage to get out of the Shield. They had just turned babyface, were white hot, and that it was a mistake to break them up when they did. Whereas Dean Ambrose believes the timing could not have been better because he feels that no one expected it and you want to say your best joke and walk off stage, so to speak, to kind of use that expression. So he felt that it was great. He felt that it made perfect sense for the Shield to break up when they did. And then soon after, I guess he had told a story about when he was on Monday Night Raw and he cut a promo on Rollins. They had this brawl and he was kind of getting over, surprisingly. He doesn't name who it is, but the accent that he uses makes it pretty clear it's Michael P.S. Hayes, or Michael Piece of Shit Hayes, as I like to call him. He went up to Ambrose after that segment, after Ambrose got this big pop after being, officially turned babyface as a singles guy, and Hayes goes to him again, apparently Hayes, probably Hayes. He says, "You might just fucking get over." And he was really pissed off about that. He was really pissed off about Hayes saying that to him, and he said, "You know what, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove every motherfucker in the back wrong about the fact that I'm going to be the babyface that they don't want, but the fans want me to be." He talks about the ability to inspire people, putting smiles on people's faces and how it's actually a real thing, despite the fact that WWE likes to promote that and shit, but it's a real thing. And then he moves into the part of the podcast where this is what was kind of pulled from the podcast more over than anything, that it was pulling teeth, as Dean says, to turn that Brock Lesnar match at WrestleMania 32 into something epic, which it really wasn't. He was content with the match, and he said there was something thrilling about walking into the ring knowing you'll be facing someone who can fucking rip you limb from limb. The match really was not that good. It was entertaining, but it was disappointing and underwhelming in terms of what it could have been. But he said artistically, Brock Lesnar did not want to do anything, and that he pitched this and that, and as did many people, but he was met with quote-unquote laziness. So calling out Brock Lesnar did Dean Ambrose with this podcast, which was pretty interesting. So which does not surprise me. Brock was getting ready to go back to UFC, go back in MMA, so maybe that was playing a factor. But then again, I think someone else said the same thing. From what I can recall. I don't remember who it was, not just Ambrose, but someone else said they wanted to work with Brock, but the match wasn't what they wanted it to be. But that's what Ambrose said. That was the big quote that was pulled from his podcast. He says the WWE title symbolizes if you believe in yourself and no one can screw with you, which I wholeheartedly believe is true as well. Stone Cold asks him his thoughts on Vince, his relationship with Vince. He says that he's boys with Vince, and that if you're not intimidated by him, and you shouldn't be, then you're cool. He says, I'm Vince's favorite wrestler, which is pretty funny. And then he tries to find Vince off screen, which is pretty great. He talks about the brand split, how it's more opportunities for guys and less overexposure for other guys, which again, I completely agree with. When Raw and SmackDown are really just one show, you're getting guys like 5 times in the matter of 5 hours on 2 shows a week. Like, that's fucking ridiculous. And also the fact they're home for an extra day, and that's a big thing too. So he was really happy about that, how he's getting more creative freedom on the mic. And then at the end of the podcast, before they close out, Stone Cold challenges Dean Ambrose to raise the bar and be edgier and to push the envelope, to which Ambrose responds Ambrose said, he says to Ambrose that he's resting on his laurels, to which Ambrose responds, I'm offended by that, and I push the envelope as much as I can. So on this topic, I'm with Dean Ambrose. I'm sure he is pushing the envelope. I think he's a better heel, and I think he will turn heel eventually. It's just kind of a more natural role for him. He kind of finds that role. He defines that role more organically than he would a babyface, but anyway. I have no doubts that what he's saying is true, that what Dean Ambrose is saying is true, about pushing the envelope and getting met with laziness. The Lesnar match, that made complete sense, but the Stone Cold quote, I don't think Stone Cold really understands how everything is really overly scripted. They really want to have a full handle on what you're saying, what you're doing, how micromanaged everything is now in WWE. I don't think he understood that. So Ambrose was offended by that, as he should have been. It kind of ended really awkwardly. You could tell that Ambrose was kind of pissed off by that, and Stone Cold wanted to light a fire within him because Ambrose is a really laid-back, chill dude. So it was an interesting note for the podcast to end on. So again, not a great podcast. It is a fascinating listen if you're an Ambrose fan, as I am. So it's not the worst one. I still say the Paige one was the worst. Again, I like Paige a lot, but she's fucking like 22 when she did that podcast a few years ago. And it was just ridiculous. Like, they talked about nothing. Again, a lot of the same things where it was very awkward, no chemistry. Ambrose and Austin did not have any chemistry at all. Neither did Paige and Austin a few years ago. But anyway, this was a good podcast. Not great. It was good. Very awkward. Not must-see, but it's interesting. So check it out when you can on the WWE Network. So that said, next Monday will probably be, again, don't quote me, but maybe that review of that Table for 3 episode with AJ Styles, Shawn Michaels, and Kevin Nash that recently aired on the network. So until then, guys, like this video, share the video, drop a comment, and above all else, subscribe to the channel for daily content. Find me on the Twitter machine, on Facebook, at the website, nextwrestling.net. All the links are down below in the description box, along with my writings for Bleacher Report, Wall Culture, Hidden Remote, Sportskeeda. You guys know where to find me. I'm pretty much everywhere. That being said, guys, enjoy Raw tonight. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews. Have an awesome Monday, and I'll catch your ass down the road.